Welcome back to the Foundation C# course. We're currently in Module 2, and in this lesson, we're going to look at loops. Specifically, we're going to look at the do loop and the while loop. So they're two similar loops that we'll look at kind of together at the same time. They do a similar thing. So let's start off with a new project. Call this console UI. And the solution name will be Module 02, Lesson 06. Okay, the first thing we do is add our console.readline at the end. Again, it's to stop the application from closing down when we hit the run button when it gets to the end. So a do loop or a do while loop, let's actually just show you what they look like and we'll talk through what they do. So here's a do loop, and then here's a while loop. Now that's yells at me right now because we have unreachable code, and I'll explain that in just a minute. So, but a do loop, what happens is it says, okay, do. Got that. And then it hits these curly braces. So it's saying do this stuff, and that's between the curly braces. So it comes down, it reads the do and says, okay, I'm going to do something. It reads the curly braces and does whatever's inside. And then it hits this while. And the while says, keep going while this is true. So if this is true, go back to the top and start over again in these curly braces and do it again and again and again until this is no longer true. And that's the reason why this is yelling at me right now, because true is always true. Therefore, we have what's called an infinite loop. And that's the very first thing to think about when you're creating loops, is be very careful that you know that your end condition will always be hit. Meaning, you don't want there to ever be a possibility that this will never be false. Because then you have an infinite loop, you'll get a Stack Overflow, and the application will crash. And that's just not a good thing. The while loop is fairly similar. It says, while this is true, run this code. So it gets the end down here, it comes back to the top and does another evaluation to see if this is true again. If it is, run the code between the curly braces again. So the difference here, because they're both, the while loop and the do while loop are pretty much the same thing. The difference is do, there's no condition yet, and so it runs this code once. And then it evaluates, should I do it again? Whereas while loop evaluates first and then runs the code, which means the do loop will always happen once, at least once. Whereas the while loop may happen 0 times. Okay, so that's the difference. So actually, that's our pro tip for today, that the while loop runs 0 or more times, the do loop runs 1 or more times. That's the big difference. And you can kind of see that in the syntax of our two loops. If you read down through it, you don't get to the while loop until the bottom of do, whereas you evaluate the top for the while loop. Okay, so let's see these in action. Let's start off with a do loop. So what we're going to do is we are going to say do, and we'll skip the while for now. I'll come back to it. We're going to say we'll do a console.write. What is your first name? And we'll say string first name equals console.readline. Okay, so now we're gonna read the first name of a person. And then we'll say console write line, hello, and their first name. Pretty simple stuff. But here's where the trick is going to come in. We're going to say console write, do you want to continue. I'll put in parentheses yes/no. And then we're going to capture the result. String continue result equals console.readLine. I'm sorry, yep, readLine. Now here's where things will break down for us. What I want to do is I want to compare to see if this says no, as in we don't want to continue. Okay? Or maybe I want to say yes, and this is going to be an evaluation we have to figure out, and I'll show you why in a minute. But if I were to try and take this variable and use it out here, continue result dot to, and notice I can't do to lower, because it's saying no. The name continue result does not exist in the current context. And this is all about scope. So we talked a little bit before about scope. I want to kind of refresh your memory a little bit. What lives inside curly braces, what gets created inside curly braces, lives only inside curly braces. Okay, so if I create this string first name, it's only available inside these curly braces, not inside these. That's called scope. The scope is just these inner curly braces, or one time through the do loop. So when I create string continue result, therefore this is false, therefore it exits out. So you have to know, do you only want to stop on no, or do you only want to continue on yes? And so that's a little bit of a difference there. You have to figure out which one you want to do. I like the idea of only continuing if they specifically say yes. Anything besides yes, I treat as a no. Now, one more thing, it might seem logical to call this continue instead of continue result. The problem is if you take this like this, notice it turns blue, because continue is a keyword identifier in .NET. We can't use it, all lowercase continue. So therefore, we have to say continue result. It's just that we couldn't name a variable do, because that's a keyword, same as while. So just to be clear on that. So what's going to happen, we're going to ask for their first name. We're going to capture it. We're going to write it out to the console. We're going to ask, do you want to continue? If they say yes, we go to the top again. Now this is going to happen one or more times because we're using a do loop, which is great. We're going to always ask them for their first name. And then if they have another person coming along, then they'll enter their first name. So let's see how this works. Okay. What's your first name? Tim. Hello, Tim. Do you want to continue? Let's say yes. What's your first name? Now notice I use capital Y, lowercase es, but because I have that to lower in there, I'm checking for all different casing by making it all lowercase and comparing to a lowercase yes. So that's something I am trying to make sure that I cover. What's my first name? Bob. Hello, Bob. Do you want to continue? No. And now notice the cursor is just blinking here. That's because we have outside the do while loop, we have the console read line waiting again. So you have this console read line waiting, and then we have another one at the end. If this was the end of the program and we didn't need to go any further, we could get rid of this So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a while loop. So a couple lessons ago, we learned about type conversion. And what do you do if the conversion fails? So let's set something up like that. So console write, what is your age? And we'll say string age text equals console.readline. And now we're going to do that comparison, say bool is valid age equals int.try_parse age text and out int age. So we're saying, okay, we want to check to see if it's a valid age. But what if it's not? Well, a couple lessons ago when we did this, we just said basically, yeah, it's an invalid age, close the program. But maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we want to force the user to give us a real age. So we could say while is valid age equals false. Okay, another way of saying this would be not is valid age, so the exclamation point and like this. So not is valid age. But the thing about this, I mean, I use this when I'm doing my own personal programs because I'm familiar with it, but it is a little bit hard to see the exclamation point sometimes. It kind of blends in with a word. And you might miss that and read it as is valid age. So this right here is very clear and understandable. So now this will only run if the age that was given was invalid. And we can say console, let's say do console write line, so CW, and say that was an invalid at once and it was not valid, let's say. So it comes in here and says that was an invalid age. Try again. Then it asks the age, and then it captures the text, and it tries to parse it again. And it sets the is that valid in here in the is valid age. If it's not valid, then it's going to come back up here at the top and say, well, it's not valid. Please try again. What's your age? Until they give us a real age. We parse it. It works. Age now has the right age. It's valid. Therefore, when we come back up here, is valid age equals true. True does not equal false. Therefore, we're done. And now we can say at the very end, console write line. We'll do our $ syntax and say your age in 10 years will be age plus 10. Okay, so now we have this all set up. Let's run it and make sure it works the way we expect it to. So what is your age? Well, I'm going to say test. That's an invalid age. Try again. Let's try testing. That's an invalid age. Try again. Random letters. Nope. Nope. TEN. Nope. How about 14? Your age in 10 years will be 24. So you see how it worked? Now I can trust there'll always be a valid age because the user gets stuck in a loop. And we can stick users in a loop, no problem. Because eventually, hopefully, they'll figure it out. They'll figure out, oh, I need to give them an actual number. I can't try something else. That's called it's called input validation and not trusting the user. But let's just see this again, and this time we'll pretend like we actually know what we're doing. 40. Your age in 10 years will be 50. You never saw the contents of the while loop. You never saw this as an invalid age because it never was invalid. The first time he gave an age, it was right, and therefore we skip this whole section of code because this runs 0 or more times. And when we give a valid age, it runs 0 times, which is perfect. You don't want users seeing an error message if it's not invalid. So that's the difference between do and while. So this is sometimes called do while versus while. It really depends. But that's the difference between do or the do while and the while loop. And that's how loops work. They continue on. Like I said, you may be very careful to have this condition, whether it's up top or at the bottom, doesn't really matter. If this condition can never be false, that's a problem. So for example, if we're counting from 1 to 10, I won't just say when it equals 10, stop. Because what if you started counting by 2s? Then you might skip it. Okay, so you count 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. So I would say greater than or equal to 10. That way it's always going to stop, even if you skip over it. Even by 1,000,000, you're still going to be protected that way. So that's the while loop. And again, coming back to our pro tip, while runs 0 or more times, do runs 1 or more times. That's the difference. The way you choose is based upon which you need, 0 or more or 1 or more. That brings us to our homework, which is I want you to create a console application, ask for the user's name, and if their name is Tim, say hello, professor. Otherwise, say hi and their name. And keep doing this until they type exit. Okay, so that's your challenge. Try and figure it out, try and get it done, and don't move on to the next lesson until you've got this mastered.